So thanks everybody for coming out here today to learn about Aurelia. Today's talk is going to be a bit of an intro, tell you what Aurelia is, give a little bit of a demo of the frameworks, teach you how to use the framework. By the end of this talk, you'll basically know 80% of what you need to know to build any Aurelia application. After that, we're going to move on to the current status of the project and where we're moving over the next couple of months over to the next year. So what is Aurelia? First thing is, Aurelia is just JavaScript. We're using the current and future versions of JavaScript. We call it ES 2015. The current version is ES 2016. But we also move forward and look at what we call ES Next, upcoming features that are coming to the language over the next couple of years. We transpile those using stuff like Babel or TypeScript. It is possible to write Aurelia applications using ES5, but I wouldn't recommend it. ES 2015 is such an awesome update to the JavaScript language that you should really use it. Aurelia itself is a collection of collaborating libraries, okay? The framework is built into these modules of code. And the cool thing with this is that this makes stripping down the framework and getting rid of stuff that you don't need very, very simple. For example, if you were building an application that didn't make use of our router, you don't even have to include that in there. Not even talking about tree shaking, if you're familiar with that, you can just not include it in your project. Aurelia is used to build JavaScript clients, single-page applications. And a couple of years ago, this would have meant things that ran in the browser, okay? But here in 2016, that's not the only place that JavaScript applications and HTML5 applications run. They run everywhere. You can run desktop applications, or you can create desktop applications using something like Electron. You can build mobile applications using something like Apache Cordova, PhoneGap. And the cool thing with Aurelia is that it's so performant that if anybody's used an Apache Cordova application and it was really, really slow, when you use something like Aurelia, it's not slow. It can be near native speed. So we utilize what's called the modern DOM and web components technology. Aurelia is built on standards. We're not reinventing the wheel, okay? This means that a lot of the code you write in an Aurelia application, you'll be able to, if you decide not to use Aurelia in the future, you're going to be able to move forward with that code and not do a complete rewrite of your application. The modern DOM is not slow. A lot of competing frameworks like to say that it's slow. It's not. We have the benchmarks to prove it, okay? And we utilize web components technology. Now, the thing with web components is they are a set of specifications for things like custom elements, the shadow DOM, and a couple other things. But the problem with the web component specifications is that they're not user-friendly. Okay, they were just not designed for mere mortals, okay? And the great thing with Aurelia is that we take all of that and bring it down to a level where someone like me, so I can use these stuff like custom elements or the shadow DOM. So the philosophy around Aurelia is, first off, it's an open source project. We're MIT licensed. The framework is free and always will be free. You can fork it if you'd like. We're up on GitHub. We like to encourage you to write clean code through the use of simple conventions, okay? We're not trying to infect your code, your application's code, with framework, just framework code. In the demo that I'll do in a little bit, you'll see this. You'll see that throughout the entire demo, there's only a couple of lines of Aurelia framework code that gets in, okay? You can compare this to other frameworks out there where you're basically writing code for that framework. We utilize modern tooling. Tools like Webpack are first-class citizens when you're building an Aurelia application. And we like to espouse testability, maintainability, extensibility, what we call the ilities, okay? When you build an Aurelia application, because there's not a lot of framework code and boilerplate in there, your code is going to be very, very testable because your code is just bog standard ES 2015 or ES 2016 or TypeScript, okay? Because of this, you're going to have very maintainable code that you don't have to have developers come in who are experts in the framework to be able to maintain your application. And also, through the use of these simple conventions, we create applications that are highly extensible. Also, Aurelia is experiencing rapid adoption, and we have a large active community. If you come to our Gitter channel, we have over 3,000 or 4,000 people active in the Gitter channel. No matter what time of day you come in there, you can ask a question. Someone will help you answer it. I am subscribed on Stack Overflow to get notifications of people asking questions on Aurelia, and I'm 10 to 15 questions a day come in, and it continues to increase month by month. So, before we get into the demo, I'll give you an idea of how easy it is to get started learning Aurelia. These are our beginner kits. These are not a basis for a production application, okay? But it's a great way to quickly get started with Aurelia so you can learn. You just go and download one of these 2 zip files, unzip it, and then depending on how you want to work with it, you can either open it as a website in Visual Studio. If you like using Node.js, just globally install the HTTP server and then run it in the folder. Or if you're using Firefox, it's even simpler. You just open the index.html file. Firefox actually allows you to run JavaScript from local files. But for today's demo, I'm going to use the Aurelia command line interface. This is something we've been working on for a couple months now. It allows you to work with Aurelia and not have to worry about all of the complexities that come with modern JavaScript development. We do everything for you. It allows you to set up a project, skeleton it out, and just get working. Now, what I have here on my screen is the index.html file that you get when you run Aurelia new from the command line. You'll see here there's only 11 lines of code. We have a little bit of styles that I've brought in, a body tag that has the Aurelia app custom attribute on it, and it points to main. So it tells the Aurelia framework that we're going to look for a file called main.js. And then we load up our vendor bundle and tell the framework to load Aurelia Bootstrapper. That's it. For most of your Aurelia applications, aside from styling a loading screen, this is going to be your index.html file. So now we'll go in and look at our code. Now, before you get too worried, I've already started up Aurelia's CLI to do what's called watch, so that every time I save a file in this project, the browser will refresh. The code will get retranspiled and the browser will refresh. I'll show you what it looks like. Currently, it's very, very simple. It's just hello world, okay? But don't worry, it's going to get more interesting. So let's look at how that hello world was created. We come in here, and first we have this main.js file. This is where you kind of configure the startup of your application. We have a little bit of stuff in here. I'm using the import syntax from ES 2015 to load a module called environment from the environment file that is right here. This environment module just tells that I want to be in debug mode, and I'm also in testing mode. So we load that in. We set up Bluebird. Is everybody familiar with Bluebird for promises? In our project, by default, we utilize Bluebird because it's faster than the native promise implementations in all of the browsers out today. And then we have a function here called configure. Now, the great thing with Aurelia is that Aurelia will inspect your modules. And if there are functions that are the proper name, it will just call them for you. We did not have to import a configure framework function from an Aurelia framework module. We just wrote a function called configure, and Aurelia sees it and passes us an instance of the framework for us to go ahead and start configuring. So first we tell Aurelia here to use its standard configuration. This is a quick and easy way to get up and running with the the full framework. And we load what's called a feature. I'm going to ignore this because it's a more advanced topic, but this is something that comes with the standard setup when you run Aurelia new. Next, we tell Aurelia that if we're in the debug environment, we want to set up development logging, which is great for us to see what's going on in the framework as we work with it. And if we're testing, we want to load the Aurelia testing plugin. Finally, we tell Aurelia to start, and then we tell it to set root, but we don't pass anything to it, which tells Aurelia to use the convention that the framework has. The convention for the framework is that it will set the root of your application to a file called app.js and app.html. So let's go up here and look at our app.js and app.html files. We have a simple class here. Who's worked with some other modern JavaScript frameworks and is familiar with having to require in modules from the framework to do anything? You know, you have to take a dependency on the framework to do anything. Well, you'll see here that we have our first file. I'm not importing anything from the Aurelia framework. All I'm doing here is telling the framework to pass me an instance of the framework. And then we come up here, and I've got app.js. There's nothing from the Aurelia framework in here. We're just setting up a standard ES 2015 class and setting a property called message on it. And then in here, we've got a template. All Aurelia views are wrapped in templates. This is our app.html. This is the view for our view model. And we just use string interpolation to interpolate in the message property. This is the simplest possible Aurelia page you can have. This $ curly brace is from ES 2015. This is the template string stuff that came with ES 2015. It's probably my favorite feature of ES 2015. But anyways, this is just hello world, and this is really boring. So let's start working with Aurelia. So I'm going to go and add in some code here. I am loading the bootstrap JavaScript. And then I have a class called welcome. I have a heading of welcome to NDC Sydney. I set up a first name and last name property. I have a getter that will concatenate the two of those with a space in between. And I have a function called submit that'll pop up an alert on the screen with the full name. Now I'm going to write out the view for this. This is a little bit more complex here. Now, the first line of this is the template tag, and then we go into where I load Bootstrap's CSS. This is using a feature of Aurelia where you can require in resources for your views and not have to load them via link tags in your HTML. This way, the framework is in charge of loading and unloading these things for you. So we load Bootstrap's CSS. And then we come down here. I've already talked about the string interpolation that allows us to place things into our HTML. So I'm placing the heading property from our view model here inside this h2 tag. And then we have a form. In the form, I have a couple of text boxes here. And this is the first time where you see how Aurelia does data binding. Okay? In Aurelia, whenever you see something dot something inside of an HTML element, you can be sure that the framework is working with that, okay? We like to have a simple templating syntax and simple binding syntax for you so that there's not a lot of arcane binding commands. We don't have bananas in boxes here. So we have the value attribute of this text box, and we're going to bind our first name property to it. So we say value.bind equals first name. Aurelia will use its simple conventions and default setup to say, okay, this is a text box. This should probably, and we're binding to the value attribute. This needs to be two-way data bound, so that any changes that are made in the view model will be propagated to the view, and any changes the user does in the browser will be propagated back into the view model. The cool thing with Aurelia is that we have same defaults for this. So if we were to say bind to the placeholder attribute, it's not likely that the user is going to be updating the value of that attribute. So we make that a one-way data binding. So the flow goes from the view model into the view, but doesn't go the other way. And we increase the speed of your application for free. But sometimes you want to override this, okay? Sometimes you want to be explicit that it's going to be two-way data bound, or maybe you want to override it and go from two-way data binding to one-way data binding. And we make it easy in Aurelia for you to do that. So if you want to be explicit about this data binding being two-way, you just say value.twoway. That's it. We have now explicitly set the data binding to two-way. We didn't have to learn any kind of arcane syntax. It just, I want two-way data binding, I say two-way. Can anybody guess how we would set up one-way data binding? Yeah, pretty simple. You've got about half of what you need already to build Aurelia applications. You've already learned. You've learned how to insert things into a template so that they're inserted into the HTML. And you've already learned about data binding to HTML properties, or HTML attributes. We do offer one other binding direction, which is really nice, which is one time. So when you do the one-time data binding, we come in, we set the value of the attribute, and then we're done. We don't look at it, we don't worry about it anymore. Crazy high performance, for example, if you were data binding to a placeholder, there's a good chance you would use the one-time data binding here. Okay, but for now, I just want to use the default binding direction of two-way, so I'm going to say bind. Now we have a last name text box. We are interpolating in the full name property. And then we have a button here. We have a submit button for our form. Now, I skipped how we're working with events to talk about the binding. But when you work with events in Aurelia, when you want to bind to events, we make this very easy for you as well. Okay? Any event on an element, you take and you say the name of the event, and then you say .trigger. And then inside the value of the attribute, you say the name of the function that you want called, and you put parentheses there. And the reason the parentheses are there is because you can actually pass in parameters to the function. Okay? One that we provide you out of the box is the event itself. So if you put $event, that'll actually pass the event into your function so you can work with it. It's really, really simple. Now, the thing with submit.trigger, the thing with the trigger binding, is that this actually attaches an event handler to your HTML element. Okay? And the problem with this is, say you were inside of a repeater, and you're going through, have every single, you have a button on a table row or something. You don't want to create hundreds or thousands of event handlers. So we provide an easy way to use something called event delegation, where Aurelia will have one event handler on the page, and events that bubble up will come up to it, and then Aurelia will handle passing the event to wherever you've told it to. We make this really simple. All you have to do is replace trigger with delegate. When we say submit.delegate, we've already started using event delegation. I recommend when you're building Aurelia applications to use the delegate binding unless the event does not support bubbling, in which case you'll have to use the trigger binding. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save our HTML and JavaScript. Come over here. Aurelia's CLI has gone ahead and recompiled our code and reloaded the page for us. We see here we have our heading, and I have data binding set up. So when I change this and put my name in here, we see that down here the full name has been interpolated in for us. And when I click submit, the event happens, and we get our alert. Not too impressive, right? Just very, very standard stuff that any JavaScript framework wants to help you with. The other thing that isn't great here is that this is just a single page, and that's not very exciting. Most of the single page applications that we build, they are single page only in the fact that they live in one HTML file. You have multiple pages inside of your application. So let's go ahead and start creating a multi-page application. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of app.js and app.html to welcome.js and welcome HTML. But in doing this, remember that Aurelia by default is going to look for an app.js and app.html, so I need to go ahead and add those back in, and I'm going to add in code that will include the use of a router. So app.js, I'll come here, do that. Now because I'm importing the Bootstrap JavaScript here, I'm going to go ahead and remove that from welcome.js. I'll save that, and I'll also take out the Bootstrap CSS from this file, and I'm going to add app.html, and I'll add in another snippet. Okay, so let's look at this. Again, we've got an application where we haven't brought in anything from the framework, okay? But we have a full running application. In fact, if I come over here, you'll see that I've already got a Bootstrap navbar at the top. Still haven't pulled in anything from the Aurelia framework. What we do in this class is Aurelia will see that there is a configure router method, and it'll call it, okay? And it will pass in a router configuration and the router itself. So we go ahead and we set the configuration up, we set the title of the router, and we provide one route. We call it welcome. And we point it to the welcome module, which is that file and HTML and JavaScript file that I just created. And we say that this route is navigable, and we give it a title of welcome with a capital W, so that when it's displayed in our UI, it actually has a capital W. That's it. That is our entire app file. Yes? The question was, what is the import Bootstrap at the top of the file? This loads Bootstrap's JavaScript. Now, usually you'll see in JavaScript or in ES 2015 files, you'll see import something from, But in this case, all we want to do is load that JavaScript. We don't actually need it in this file. So we just say import Bootstrap. It loads it, and we just move on with our day. Okay? So this configure router method is called by the framework because it exists. And that is it, okay? Let's go over here to our app template. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. You'll see here where we're requiring in Bootstrap CSS. In Aurelia, if you want to load CSS files, here we're loading Bootstrap CSS, but you could also load your own custom CSS using this. This require element is a custom element provided by the framework that allows you to pull in resources into your view, okay? You'll see this be used later on in the demo. Down here, we have a router view custom element. This is another custom element provided by the framework. This is a custom element. It's pretty obvious what it is. This is where the router will put the view that it is displaying for you, okay? Now, I minimized the Bootstrap navbar so we could talk about the router. But now let's go in and look at this. Is everybody familiar with Bootstrap navbars? This is a bog standard Bootstrap navbar just with Aurelia templating inside of it. First, you'll see here that we have the router title being brought in, being interpolated in. And then down here, we have something new. We have repeat.for on this list element. Okay, this is Aurelia's repeater. The guy who started the Aurelia framework is named Rob Eisenberg, and he's told me that creating frameworks is easy, creating repeaters is the hard part. Okay, so anybody who thinks that they want to build a framework for themselves, try building a repeater, and you'll see that it's just not fun. But anyways, this is our repeater, and we're saying repeat.for row of router.navigation. As I talked about with string interpolation, like up here with the router title, Aurelia likes to take features from ES 2015, features from JavaScript, and bring them into your templating so that there isn't this mismatch and two different ways that you have to know about how to do things. One of the new features in ES 2015 was a new for loop called the for of loop. And it's nice because it loops over things like you would expect it to, okay? So we brought that syntax into our repeater and said, repeat.for row of router.navigation. So we're going to go over every navigable route in our router, which in this case is just one. Here you see string interpolation being used inside of our class attribute. What we're doing here is we're saying if the row is active, add the active attribute to it, or sorry, active class name to it, otherwise add nothing. This is really nice. You can actually have JavaScript expressions inside of your templates so that you can do more complex things with them. This doesn't support the full JavaScript language because that would be a bad thing, but it supports pretty much everything you would need to do. So we set the active if the route is active. And then down here, again, we're binding to the href attribute of the link and setting that here. And we bring in this, bring in the title. So that's all pretty standard stuff. But there is one last new thing to show you in this template, which is our if attribute. Now, a fairly standard thing you need to do when you're building applications is show and hide things from the UI, okay? And there's two ways to go about doing this in HTML. You can either add and remove the elements from the DOM, or you can just put a display none or remove that from it. And I simplify it with the display none, but that's the basic idea. You know, you can hide it or you can remove it. And so Aurelia provides you out-of-the-box ways to do both of those things. If you want to add and remove things from the DOM, use the if attribute. If you just want to hide and show things, use the show attribute. But in this case, we want to add and remove this spinner, which is a font awesome spinner, from the DOM. So we're using if.bind, okay? So we're binding this to the isNavigating property of our router. And so whenever the isNavigating property is true, we'll see a spinner. And whenever it goes to false, it'll be removed from the DOM for us. So again, we come back over here, and we see that I can click on this. That's it. But this is still pretty boring. We've got a single page, and we set up a router. So why don't we add a second page? So what I'm going to do is come back into our app.js, and I'm going to copy this route. I'm going to paste it in. And I'm going to create a new route called users that points to a module called users. I'm going to give it a name of users, point it to the module, users, and I'm going to give it the title of users. Now when I save this file and come back over here, you'll see that we're showing a new users route. But if I click on it, because it doesn't exist, nothing happens. The routing fails. So let's go ahead and add this new module to our application, new page to our application. Go ahead and add users.js and users.html. Okay. Let's first look at the JavaScript for our page. Now I want to point out something important on line 1. We are 30 minutes into this presentation, and this is the first time I've brought in anything from the Irelia framework. This is the first time I have imported a module from Irelia, or imported anything from Irelia. In this case, I'm bringing in our inject decorator, and then I'm bringing in our HTTP client, our fetch client, which technically is not part of the framework. It's an add-on that you can use. Now, the inject decorator that I'm bringing in is used to work with our dependency injection provider. In this case, our class, we want to utilize an HTTP client, and so we need to have that injected in for us. Dependency injection is a great pattern to use. It's fairly standard in frameworks these days, and we provide one. We provide a provider for you, okay? So when you set up the decorator and you say inject HTTP client, Aurelia will pass this into your constructor. You'll get an instance of that class. So we configure this instance, and then we set it as a property on our class, okay? Also up here, we have a heading property, and we go ahead and create an empty array for users. Now, what this page does is it goes out to GitHub and pulls in a list of users, and then it displays them. If anybody's familiar with Aurelia's skeleton, this should look very familiar. This is a great way to see how to use, to make AJAX requests with Aurelia, but also how to integrate those AJAX requests into the framework's lifecycle. And that's what we do here in this activate function. The activate function is part of the router's lifecycle. It looks for functions that exist on modules that are being loaded by the router, and if they exist, it calls them. If they don't exist, it doesn't bother with it. So when the Aurelia router sees the activate function, it will call it, and if the function returns a JavaScript promise, it will actually wait for that promise to resolve before it continues with the router's lifecycle. Okay? So in this case, we go out to GitHub's API and pull in the list of users, convert it to JSON, and or convert it from JSON, and then set that as to the user's property on our view model. That's it. That's 25 lines of code. That's all we need. And then I come over here to our view, and I add in a very simple template. Everything you see in this template, I've already taught you about. Okay? We have string interpolation for the heading. We have a repeater over the user's property, binding to the source attribute of our image tag. Everything, you already know how to build fairly complex views using Aurelia. So I'll go ahead and save that. And when I come over here to our page, and I click on users, thankfully, if anybody's been using the conference Wi-Fi, the hotel Wi-Fi, I have a wired connection, so my internet actually works. But we load a set of cards with GitHub users. The other thing that's thankful about this is that GitHub always loads these in order of how long they've been GitHub users, so I don't have to worry about bad avatar images. So now we've got a 2-page Aurelia application. We see how to use navigation in Aurelia application, and we can see when I refresh this, if I refresh this and then click here, well, it loads so quickly, but if I were on the conference Wi-Fi, you would actually get to see that the page wouldn't load until this AJAX request was finished. This allows you to control the lifecycle of your page in very fine-grained detail. We also offer a can activate and a can deactivate hook in the router. So this is cool. But anybody who's ever been to demos at conferences always sees things that they don't use every day, or that they would never do at the office. You see, I like to call them stupid coding tricks. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to do a stupid coding trick for you. I'm going to take this welcome page that we created that was originally our entire application and then became a page in our application. I'm now going to take it, and without modifying the code, I'm going to make it a custom element inside itself. I don't know why anyone would ever do this, because it would crash your browser, but I'm going to do it. So I'm going to come to our welcome.html file, and I'm just going to add down here an element called welcome. I'm going to close it. I've created a custom element purely by creating a module, a view and a view model pair with the file name of welcome. I have created a custom element called welcome. This is a really cool feature of the framework where you can have something that's a page in your application, but you can also use it as a custom element in your application. But the thing is, if I hit save right now, I'm going to crash Chrome because this is recursive and it will just blow up eventually. So we need to have a way of only adding this to the DOM when I tell it to. So I'm going to use that if binding. I'm going to bind it to a checkbox that I'm going to add right here. Say input type equals checkbox. I'm going to use something I haven't taught you about, which is our ref attribute. A lot of times when you're building applications, modern JavaScript applications, you need to work with actual elements. But how do you do that when you're working with stuff like this, where it's dynamically added and removed from the DOM? Things where maybe you've got multiple things on the page that maybe have the same ID. 5 years ago, we would have used jQuery. But you can think of how that would fall apart quickly, especially if you were inside of a repeater or something. What we do in Aurelia is we provide this ref attribute, and you can just say, we'll give this the name of do dumb stuff. I'll close it out. Now, this automatically adds this element to our view model as a property on our view model, okay? So the cool thing with this is that I can now use this down here inside of a data binding. Now remember I talked about the difference between the show and the if bindings? This is a place where it's really important to use if. I'm going to say if.bind equals do dumb stuff dot checked. Not dot value because it's a checkbox and HTML inputs are weird. And I'm going to save it. And if I've done everything correctly, now when I come in here and I click these checkboxes, they can go across the page. Pretty cool, right? I've taken something from being the entire application to being a page in our application to being a custom element. I didn't write any JavaScript. In fact, I took JavaScript out of that file. I removed the import bootstrap, okay? I've had to do nothing to make this journey, okay? But if we were to add a little bit of JavaScript, we could do something cool. See, the problem we have right now is I have data binding, but it stays inside of each of these instances of the welcome module. And it doesn't go up and it doesn't go down. And that's really frustrating because when I'm doing dumb stuff, I want to do dumb stuff. So I want to data bind this all together, okay? So to set that up, I'm going to come in, and for the second time in this demo, I'm going to pull in something from the framework. I'm going to come to this file and change this file. I'm going to import bindable from Aurelia-framework. It's only the second time you've seen the words Aurelia framework in this demo. Now this bindable thing that I've brought in is a decorator. Decorators are a pending standard that hopefully will be brought into ES 2017 or ES 2018, but we're able to use them today in TypeScript and by the use of Babel if we're writing standard ECMAScript. Now I'm going to attach this decorator bindable to the first name property of our view model. By doing this, I have set up a convention-based bindable property or bindable attribute on our custom element. Okay? By default, it is a one-way data binding, but I'm going to show you how to override that easily in a minute. So I'll go ahead and save that, and I come back over here. I'm going to say first-name. Now first, everybody's probably wondering, why don't I do first name, right? HTML is case insensitive. So if I put this here, first name, this would get lowercase before it made it into JavaScript, okay? But our attribute is first capital name, and so how would we make sure that we can match these up? And we do this by converting from camel case in JavaScript to kebab case or dash case in our HTML templates. Now, I say first name dot bind equals first name. So now I have bound the page's first name property to the custom element's first name property, and then the second time, or inside the custom element, I'm binding the parent custom element's first name property to the child custom element's first name property. So now, when I save that, and I come over here, click my checkbox, type my name in here, it updates. Now, of course, I only set the binding up for the first name property, not the second name or the last name property. So it only updates on that one. But, I change it to James or whatever, and it updates. And that's cool, but as I said, it's a one-way data binding. So when I change this to Ashley, it doesn't update over here. And we're doing dumb stuff, so why don't we set this as a two-way data binding? Okay, now who remembers how I can override the default binding direction and explicitly make this a two-way data binding? Yeah, pretty simple, right? So I save that, come over here, add a couple checkboxes, and now when I type, it goes up and down. I've got two-way data binding. I've added one line of code and a word to my view model. I've taken the entire application to a page, to a custom element, and I've set up data binding on this custom element with a very small amount of code now. Now, one thing I do want to show you before we finish this demo is I want to talk about componentized applications. Aurelia helps you to build componentized applications. Okay, you can, like I took with that welcome page, and I turned that into a component, into a custom element. You know, we want you to do that with your templates. So if you have something that might get reused or something where it doesn't make sense being part of a template, so you want to pull that out and put it on its own, we give you ways to do that through custom elements. But the thing with creating a custom element is that you have to write JavaScript for it. You have to have a view model behind it. And sometimes you have components that it's really frustrating because all you're doing is creating an empty class, or you're creating a class and you're setting up one property on that, and you're thinking, I paid good money for this JavaScript framework. It should do that for me. That was a joke. Framework's free. So, but you know, the people who write the framework, write Aurelia, which includes me, we're developers. We use Aurelia on a day-to-day basis for our day jobs, and we are lazy, just like any other good developer. And so we came up with a way to have the framework build that view model for you when you have a custom element or a component where there's no real business logic in it. It's just template logic. And we call those HTML-only custom elements. And to show you how that works, I'm going to take our nav bar, because I look at it and I say, it's just really cluttering up my main template page. So I'm going to take it out. I'm going to add a new file in here called navbar.html. And I'm going to add a template element. Okay, but I'm going to do one thing on this template element. I'm going to add an attribute called bindable. And I'm going to tell it I want a bindable property on this component called router. Okay, if you had more than one bindable property you wanted to set up, you would add them in a comma-separated list. You can only do one-way data binding with this. The bindable decorator that I showed you earlier, you can actually pull in and set the default binding direction to be one-way or two-way or one time. You can explicitly set that. With HTML-only custom elements, you're going to get one-way data binding, and if you need to override it, you got to do it in the parent template. So I'm going to go ahead, close this out, and I'm going to paste in the code. Oh, that didn't work right. Instead of collapsing it, I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to paste it in. And I'll save that. Then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add a require element. I'm going to pull in our navbar.html file. And I'm going to close that out. Now, I've put .html into this require element from, and that tells Aurelia this is an HTML-only custom element. If I were pulling in a standard custom element that has both a view and a view model, I would leave off the extension, because then Aurelia would know, okay, I got to go load a JavaScript file and possibly also an HTML file. So I've done that. Now I'm going to say navbar router.bind equals router. I'm going to close that, save it. When I come over here, you see the page is still working just the same as always, except that if I inspect here, you see that now I have the navbar custom element. Okay? I just created a custom element and I didn't write a lick of JavaScript. That's awesome. Has anybody here tried to create standards-based custom elements? It's not easy. You have to write JavaScript no matter what. The great thing when you're using Aurelia is that we deal with that for you. We write the JavaScript that's necessary to create custom elements. So I created a custom element without writing any JavaScript. I also took a module in our application from being the entire application to being a page in our application to being a custom element inside of itself in our application. What do I call that? I call that magic. I just love this GIF. I love arrested development, so I'm just going to let it sit there for a minute. So anyways, that was my demo. Let's talk about the status of the framework and where we're going to be going over the next couple of months. So we released version 1.0 RTM, RTW of Aurelia last week. You are free to use it. It is go live. It is ready. We've squashed bugs. You're free to use it. There's no worries. We are fully featured. Obviously, we hit 1.0. We have a full set of API documentation and profile-based articles. Let me show you what that is in our documentation. If I come down here, first, this is our blog post. If you go to blog.durandal.io, you can see the framework's blog. But this is the Irelia Hub, okay? We are really proud of what we've done here. We provide you with a way to look at documentation that is suited to you as a developer, or we make things a lot simpler if you're a CTO. So we give you 3 documents to look at. We have code, or we have demonstration code inside of these. If I look at, let's look at a value converter. We'll look at a simple value converter. Down here. Oh, it's loading. But we have actual runnable demos inside our documentation. We're working on for the future to make these editable so that you can play with it inside the documentation. But we're really proud of our documentation. I'm really proud of it because I've written a lot of it, which is great because I forget things, and so I can go back and ask past Ashley what the way to do things are. Okay. We have real applications in development and in production. There are large companies out there, Fortune 50 companies, that are using Aurelia today. They have applications in production, or they have recently started building Aurelia applications. This is not a framework that's going to go away. Real people are using this. And again, rapid adoption and a large active community. And we have a global training and consulting partner network, and it's very global because I came here from Florida. And I am a certified Aurelia trainer, so bring me in. Yes, so what are we working on currently with the framework? Well, tooling enhancements. As I mentioned earlier, our CLI, our command line interface, we're working on that. If anybody is a .NET developer and is used to working inside of Visual Studio, the CLI work that we're doing is going to make that a lot easier, especially in the next version of Visual Studio where it finally supports ECMAScript 2015. We were working very closely with Microsoft to make that stuff happen for you. I talk to Mads Christensen fairly often, and he's a huge fan of Aurelia. We're working on server rendering. We know that this is important, both as just a checkbox for the framework, but also as something that helps with stuff like search engine optimization. We have what's called our Node platform abstraction layer that is community developed, and we're bringing that in as a core part of the framework so that server rendering will work for you very, very soon. We're doing bug fixes. No matter what, there's always bugs to fix. So anyways, that's it. Thank you. If you want to discuss the framework, check out our Gitter channel. follow our framework Twitter at Aurelia Effect. Follow me. I'm on Twitter at Ashley M. Grant. My blog is aurelia.ninja. And any feedback you have about this, or if you want any of the demos, or if you want to see some more complicated, more advanced demo code, you can hit me up on Twitter, and I'll get that to you. But anyways, thank you. Also, I have T-shirts, and it looks like there's a small enough number of people in here that I should have a T-shirt for everyone. So come on up. Thank you. Yes? Validation. The validation library was in a bit of flux for a while. It was being built on Validate.js. It was rebooted a couple months ago, and it's in active development, and it should be done very, very soon. So, yeah.
So you're validating the DOM or you're validating the model?
I'm not an expert on it, so I don't know. But I can get you an answer. Ask me that on Twitter, and I'll point you to the person who can answer it. Any other questions? Yes? The Irelia Interface. Irelia Interface, for those who aren't familiar, is a set of widgets that we've talked about recently. If I go here to our blog and I scroll back a little bit from about a month ago, these are a set of widgets that we're working on that are great at working on mobile devices. They've been optimized for mobile. A big problem with a lot of time, like if you've used, as I mentioned earlier, if you've used PhoneGap or Apache Cordova applications, the performance is really, really crappy. These are a set of tools that we're building. Here, I'll play. These are our switches that we're building to help you out. We don't have anything currently to announce, but hopefully over the next month or two, we will have more information on that, and it will be should be really information that makes you happy. So, any other questions? All right, let's go get T-shirts. Thank you. So good, I got 2 rounds of applause.